Hi, and welcome to our web lecture on women and music. My name is Catherine Aaron. I'm the assistant conductor here at the Chorus of Westerly, and I am joined by my partner in crime, Genevieve Spitale. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm the Patron Services Manager at the Chorus of Westerly, and I also I'm a music educator here with our children and our adults.
Excellent. And today we are welcoming Beth Willer to join this discussion about women and music. But before we get started, I wanted to just get a word of thanks to our sponsors, the Rhode Island Council on the Arts and the Blue Mitten Thrift Shop. Every year we try to live up to the call of our mission statement to harness the power of music to transform lives and nourish the soul of the community. And the support of the Rhode Island Council on the Arts and the Blue Mitten Thrift Shop helped to make that possible. And we're truly grateful for that now and always. Before we begin our interview, I would just like to share some of the many accomplishments and the musical background of our guest before we bring her on camera. Beth Willer is absolutely at the foreground of modern choral music in America and continues to be a name to watch. An accomplished conductor, educator, and entrepreneur, Dr. Willer has just been appointed Director of Choral Studies and Ensembles at the Peabody Institute at the Johns Hopkins University. Her previous academic appointments include positions at Harvard University, the Boston Conservatory, and Bucknell University. She has led numerous young artist ensembles throughout New England, including choruses at the Tanglewood Institute, New England Conservatory's Preparatory School, the Boston Arts Academy, and the Walnut Hill School. Folks, this is just the beginning. Also a popular guest conductor, she has led premier choral and orchestral ensembles from across the country, including, these are many names that you will know, Seraphic Fire, the Bang on a Can All-Stars, the New York Baroque Incorporated, Roomful of Teeth, the Tanglewood Music Center Orchestra, Boston Modern Orchestra Project, and the Boston Symphony Orchestra. But the Chorus of Westerly knows Willer best as the founder and artistic director of the award-winning women's vocal group, the Lorelei Ensemble. Since its founding in 2007, Lorelei is driven by its mission to advance and elevate women's voices and to enrich the repertoire through forward-thinking and co-creative collaboration, bringing works to life that point toward a new normal for vocal artists and women in music. Collaborating composers include David Lang, Julia Wolfe, George Benjamin, Katia Ghosh, Lisa Villawa, Karim Rustom, Jessica Meyer, and Christopher Cerrone. Hopefully we'll hear more about that later. And on and on and on. Recent recordings include David Lang's Love Fail and the album Impermanence, featuring the premiere recording of Peter Gilbert's Tsukimi, early Renaissance motets of Guillaume Dufay, and selections from the 15th century Turin manuscript and the 12th century Codex Calixtinus. In 2020, and going into the 2021 season, the Lorelei Ensemble was poised to launch the world premiere of Julia Wolfe's Her Story, in performances with no less than 5 co-commissioning orchestras: the Nashville Symphony, the San Francisco Symphony, the Chicago Symphony, the National Symphony Orchestra, and the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Written specifically for the Lorelei Ensemble to commemorate the centennial of the 1920 ratification of the 19th Amendment. Her Story is the latest in the series of Julia Wolfe's compositions, highlighting monumental and turbulent moments in American history and culture. She earned her master's degree and doctorate in conducting from Boston University and an undergraduate degree in music education and trumpet performance from Luther College, and is also the 2014 recipient of the Louis Bato Award for Innovative Action and Entrepreneurial Zeal. Please welcome to our webcast, Beth Willer.
Thank you so much for having me. That was great. Thorough. It's been a busy couple of decades here.
You've gotten some stuff done, my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, that was quite an impressive list of accomplishments over the last couple of years. So you've obviously accomplished so much in this small amount of time. Can you tell us a little bit about your roots and when you began to study music?
Yeah, I love to talk about my beginnings. I grew up in South Dakota, and I just grew a number of teachers, whether those were private instructors or in public school or in the churches, where I was singing in church choir, and I was just kind of musically active, in every corner of my life. My parents were amateur musicians, and I had a number of teachers that really gave me ownership of what I was doing and encouraged me to do repertoire that was not sort of in the main corridor of repertoire. And if I was interested in doing something or arranging something or transcribing something, I was always given that license with really very little hesitation. And I now see what a gift and maybe even how unusual it was. I was given to perform, but to create as a young person. And that was in South Dakota. And then I went and did my undergrad at Luther College, as you mentioned, in Northeast Iowa, which is known as one of the Lutheran choral schools. So I, steeped in that a cappella tradition, which is a very specific ensemble tradition. But I also pursued a lot of trumpet performance there, and I would credit that with some of my tastes and leanings in repertoire, because I did a lot of contemporary music. I did jazz. I did, kind of whatever I would be allowed to do. I just sort of explored every corner of the repertoire in that way. And alongside doing all of the vocal ensemble repertoire, and I did this music education degree and really thought for sure I would be a high school choir director. Hopefully I would also continue to be a professional trumpet player. I quickly realized that might not be possible to do both things. First teaching Johnson, and I did some show choir there, which I like to mention because I think that was one of the first times in my career where I really had total ownership of creating a program, arranging a program, working with other creators like a choreographer and an arranger. And that was actually pretty informative for me, also in identifying my my interest in musical theater and popular styles. And so that kind of stayed in me. But it was only a few years into that job, which I really loved and was a great position, that I realized my passion for the repertoire was at least as strong as my passion for the pedagogy, and I really wanted to go back to school because I knew I had a lot more to learn. So I then hiked out to Boston and found Ann Howard Jones at Boston University, where I really, I was exposed to a whole bunch of core repertoire that I had never experienced either listening or performing. And so that was eye-opening for me. But then I also kind of fell into the new music scene in Boston, early music scene in Boston, and saw a window of opportunity to do this work with Lorelei.
I think when you talked about your teachers growing up, giving you that, giving you as a young child permission to do what interests you, I think that speaks to all of us as musicians. Because I know all of us are thinking back and like, oh yeah, I do remember this teacher and that teacher who has certainly shaped now. I think wonderful those influences. So what pushed you forward in all of that to pursue a doctorate in choral conducting? Was there something in particular that made you realize this is for me?
Yeah, I think, the master's was really, I just wanted to know more about the repertoire, and I wanted to dig deeper into this art form that I felt like I had so much more to learn about. And then I took a few years off. I was working at Harvard and Walnut Hill and NEC prep, and really just kind of getting my my artistic hands dirty in as many different types of work and teaching that I could. And I kind of always knew the doctorate was going to be an option, but I knew that I wanted to keep teaching, and I wanted to teach at the collegiate level. And I knew, to do that and to have my own program and really shape the future of that, I wanted to be working with young artists at that level. And so I needed to get that degree, and I was happy to go back to BU and study with Anne again. And I continued my work with Lorelei as part of my scholarship, which I think was really, part of when I started to look at doctoral programs, I of course looked at many different institutions, but the idea of walking away from this thing I had started as a master's student and was really starting to take off, for me to be able to stay in that city that I knew and that had really shaped my lucky maybe that I was able to do that because I think Boston, I lived in Boston longer than I've lived anywhere. So it's kind of my home city, and it was a great place to study and learn.
This is a little bit off topic, but you and I have something similar. I lived in Boston in 2008, 2009, and 2010. I lived on St. Paul Street, so right there by Boston University. So I do have this special pride towards the music scene in Boston. And I know, as you said, that's where you, in your master's, began Lorelei. Can you talk to us a little bit of the beginnings of the ensemble?
Yeah, well, coming out of my teaching job in Eau Claire, I had really started to identify how much I loved working with treble voices and women's voices. Mm-hmm. And I had started to dig into that repertoire, and I had had a really excellent experience also doing that at Luther with Sandra Peter. And so when I came into BU, my first recital assignment was to work with the treble vocal ensemble there. And a good friend of mine now, who I hardly knew then, was in a course with me, Mary Montgomery Capel. She was a composer, and she had a set of music that she handed to me. And she said, I've only performed a couple of movements of this, but the whole thing has yet to be premiered. Do you think you could do it, with the BU Women's Chorus? And I said, well, it's a little bit beyond, I think, what I can do with this group, but let's put a group together of some grad students and let's do it. And she sang, and I conducted, and a number of my conducting colleagues and voice colleagues joined us, and that was, just sort of just a pickup group, right? Like we hadn't named it Lorelei, but it was kind of growing out of this thing in my gut, which was that I wanted to change the repertoire and expand the repertoire, which I was becoming more and more aware as I was programming for this group and previous groups that, the pile of repertoire I had to choose from was not nearly as stacked for SA ensemble as it was for SATB. And even the amount of it, the composers were not writing their best music for SA ensembles in most instances. And not that there isn't great repertoire before the 20th and 21st century, but there just is far less of it. And there's a limited amount of it that can be repurposed. And so I really just kind of project by project, and as I met more and more singers in the area, started to build this roster that really solidified a few years later. I mean, it took some time for us to find, the group that was really able to point us in this direction of a national reputation and working with these great composers. And then once we got going, I mean, it was just, I couldn't walk away from it at that point. But I can't say that I started as an entrepreneur with like all of the things in mind, of all the marketing, all of the development, all of the board, developing a board to support us in governance. And so I think, for me, I was really starting with this like artistic thing in my belly that I wanted to do. And I gradually built an organization around it that is now Lorelei.
Isn't that how the best, organizations begin? It's just a gut feeling. It's just something that's inside of us that then manifests into something greater. So talking about Lorelei, a lot of Lorelei's work is, new composition, and your life's work is promoting old and new composition. Can you talk about how early music and new music are really showing that they go together hand in hand in these ensembles, in these smaller ensembles?
Yeah, I mean, I think what a lot of folks think about is sort of the sound that we expect from those two types of repertoire. They seem to be related in some ways, and that really depends on who the composer is, right? So I guess I wouldn't go there. I would say what draws me to these two repertoires, and this, I think everybody has different reasons for being drawn to doing any kind of performance, right? But for me, it's really the repertoire that I feel like I have the most artistic license with, or that the artists have the most artistic license with, in that there's not as much of an established performance history. With early repertoire, there's a lot of treatises, and we can do a lot of reading about how we and hypothesizing about how we think that music was probably performed, but there are still numerous questions, especially around medieval repertoire, so anything prior to the Renaissance. You know, there's a lot of scholarship, and it's our responsibility to read it, but there's a certain point at which even the greatest scholars will say, and we don't know, so make a choice. Like, what is artistically compelling? What works for you and for the particular voices that you have? That has been very freeing for me in performing early repertoire. And the truth is, I think there was, you know, some more virtuosic repertoire for women's voices being written prior to the Renaissance. And so you can look into convents, and you can look into some private courts in the early Baroque period where there was some really virtuosic, excellent music being written for women. And I started to discover that at BU. And I remember being in a course with Joel Sheveloff, and he was talking about these Monteverdi trios, these canzonetti that I had never heard of. And I was like, how has this never been on my plate as someone who loves this repertoire? And so I dug, and then I found some Guerrero that was similar, and so on and so forth, doing, you know, repertoire research that had nothing to do with my degree at the time. I just fell in love with what was there. And most of it, you know, I could maybe find one recording, maybe, you know, and then with new music, of course, there's no performance history. It's all about bringing something to life and then being in conversation with the creator, and whether or not that's, you know, my idea or a composer's idea or an idea that we sort of come together and create together. You know, there's something about the process of bringing the piece just to the paper and then taking the piece off the paper with these incredible artists of Lorelei that are so trusting of each other and fearless of doing things that maybe you know, are unfamiliar to their ears or unfamiliar to their instrument, and really, you know, doing the work to say what sound could we make, what words could we be singing as women, what you know, what is a one and a part vocal ensemble versus a choir, and how do we sort of project our individual artistry on stage. I think there's a different, not that you can't own anything in between there, but those two repertoires for me, that's why I'm excited about them, because they invite me to think creatively in all aspects of performance.
Absolutely.
Definitely preaching to the choir on that one.
Yeah. I also just love them. Like, that's my desert island music.
Nice. So let's pivot a little. Let's look at another aspect of what Lorelei is working on right now. Let's talk about the Julia Wolfe project. This is just a huge undertaking. The partnerships that you forged with the orchestras. Can you talk a little bit about how this process got started? Maybe apart from the centennial, what the impetus was to just take on all of this networking. I mean, it is nationwide.
Well, as usual, it's not like you don't set out quite knowing what it's going to be. And I had just performed Anthracite Fields of Julia Wolfe's at Bucknell with my students and some members of the Lycoming College Choir. And it was a really transformative experience, not just for my students, but it was one of the most exciting live performances I've been a part of. And I was really drawn to Julia's way of telling, as you read, you know, from the press release, like telling these American stories and really amplifying maybe narratives that haven't been amplified from our history. And being, at that time, I was in coal country and really sort of telling these stories of people that had worked in the coal industry at a time where we were really grappling with climate change. That was incredibly powerful. And she did it in a brilliant way that was, you know, paying homage to the history of this industry, but also looking forward. And I think that's one of the really unique gifts in what Julie does. But so I called her, I suppose it was about 6 months later. I mean, of course, at the time I said, I really hope we can work together on something new. And then months passed and I called her in January. I was finally on sabbatical and I had creative space in my brain. And I said, can we think about doing something for the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment? And we started really just at that base level. I knew, you know, I wanted to look to the fall of 2020, not to the ratification, but actually to the anniversary of the actual vote, the first vote, which was only just a couple of days difference than our actual voting day this year and election day. And so we started to talk about what that would be, what kind of instrumentation it would be. And Julie said, well, could we do it with symphony orchestra? And I said, yes, that's a lot, it's a lot bigger project, but of course I want to do that. And we had at that point had a couple of collaborations with Boston Symphony. So, that was my first go-to. And we really, at that point, started conversations, not just with Julia, but with the whole Bang on a Can team, which of course we all know is a real force in new music. And so they had their connections, and we pursued all of those opportunities together. And of course, we're aching to do the piece. And at this point, we would already have 3 performances under our belt. But or 3 cities under our belt, each with 3 performances actually. So we're planning for that to be rescheduled. And I think, what's really exciting about telling that story is it does not become less relevant after this 100th anniversary. And we've all learned that, the story of women's suffrage is incredibly complicated, and it's not neat. There's a lot in it to unpack about race and about sort of the continued work that has been done to grant equal voting rights to everyone in this country, which we are still working on, right? And to think about how fragile progress is, that we can, have these milestones, the passage of an amendment, but that is not the end of the work. And in fact, it is only the beginning of the work, which is to then follow through with this change that we've committed to. And of course, we as a country have not nailed it when it comes to voting rights yet. And so I'm so excited to hear, to deliver Julie's message, which I think is going to be a collective message for our country, not just about the history of this amendment and voting rights, but really about the future. So it should be really thrilling. It's going to be theatrical and semi-staged.
Wow.
Not like some of the other pieces she's done, which have had large scale projections. We're actually not doing that. We've made a choice to make it more focused on the live performers. So concepts for that are we have more time to develop them now, which is great.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Remind everybody the different orchestras that are involved with this, because they're all major hitters.
Yeah, so the premiere was to be in Nashville, and we sure hope it will still be in Nashville, because that is the state that ratified the amendment on the state level. That was sort of the last one we needed to make it national, right? Mm-hmm. So they are very invested in the project because of their particular history. And then the plan was to go on to Boston, San Francisco, Chicago, and then to end our tour in DC with the National Symphony.
Wow. Well, I can't imagine that there won't be an appetite for this for many years to come, because I think everybody in the country is realizing we have to roll up our sleeves a little bit higher and get back to work.
Absolutely.
And this sounds like it's going to be inspiring generations to come. So we'll all keep our fingers crossed that it gets launched sooner rather than later.
Yes.
I'd love to talk to you about your recent appointment to the Peabody Institute. Am I correct in thinking that you are taking Ed Polachek's place? Was there somebody in?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. So you are bringing a completely fresh perspective to this department, and it's actually you're definitely a harbinger of things to come. That whole institution has sort of overturned a generation of musicians who've been there for a long, long time, and now it's very much a 21st century institution. And I'm wondering what you hope to kind of hit the ground running with.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that I was so drawn to Peabody in the process of making my decision to come there, in how committed they are to shaping 21st century musicians and to really reshaping the curriculum, and to think about, in particular, how to incorporate the performance of new music and not just new classical music into the work of our young artists. And that to me is thrilling. And I think something that we could say we're behind on in the United States, and maybe really in any training ground for classical musicians across the globe, that we really, Peabody is working to embrace a much broader definition of what it means to be a vocal artist, which I'm very excited about, and just something I've been working on with Lorelei. So I feel a real match in mission with the institution. So my my charge there is to lead the vocal ensembles, which of course right now looks very different than it will ultimately. But my sort of philosophy as a vocal music educator and as a conductor and an artistic director is to really cultivate simultaneously individual artistry and collective artistry, and to not sort of mute the individual and their artistic interests, but also their vocal personality. I think it's really important to develop your own presence on stage, whether you're singing by yourself or you're singing with other people. And then how do you then put that in service to collective art making? And I think there are some professional ensembles that really model that well right now. And so I'm connecting these students with those ensembles as much as possible, and hopefully we'll be, incorporating vocal chamber music into the work, as well as small chamber choirs and large symphonic ensembles. So it will be a broad, set of ensembles once we've really gotten everything off the ground, but to give both graduate and undergraduate students opportunities to develop their skills as professional ensemble musicians, right? And then even perhaps the bigger charge that I have is to develop a new degree program in conducting. Peabody has never had a choral conducting degree, which is incredibly exciting to me. I can't wait to begin that work. It's still a couple of years into the future that we'll launch that. But I really think of that not as just conducting as much as it is a training ground for artistic leaders and artistic entrepreneurs that are conductors, right? People that want to do groundbreaking work, that want to help shape the future of classical music and really just ensemble singing, which I think is a corner of our our national art making. If you want to think of all art making, not just music, I think vocal ensemble singing is really kind of knocking down a lot of walls right now in a way that it maybe hasn't in the last century. And so it's a thrilling time to teach young people. And I think young people really want to do new things, and they want ownership. And that's got me thinking back to, my education and the experiences, to transcribe some Stevie Wonder tune and make it part of a show that I was going to be in, that it wasn't just about, singing the repertoire that my teacher handed me and doing it as perfectly as I possibly could. That is a skill, and that will get you a job. But if you want artistic satisfaction, you've got to have a little bit of ownership, and I hope to, just help both through my ensemble work and this degree program to cultivate, give people the impetus to do the thing that they see as missing, right?
I think it's amazing that you're there. It feels like such a good fit. It's my alma mater, and
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I did my undergrad there, and Mark Sudik, who runs the Renaissance Ensemble, changed my life. He's one of those gurus. But you can also do like the ink hasn't even dried off the page. And the art scene in Baltimore and DC, they're very close to each other. They're only about 45 minutes apart, is such that it's easy for both undergrads and grads to go out and start their careers trying music, all different styles, and someone will show up and pay them to do it, which is a very unique situation. But you have things like the High Zero Festival with experimental music. It's been around forever, but it's groundbreaking. And to have a mover and shaker like you, they're expanding Peabody's already rather diverse offerings. I mean, it was one of the first programs to have jazz and early music, but it's breaking out of that very square, rigid box of this is classical singing and it must be this way, and ladies are in dresses and men are in pants, and we only sing romantic repertoire. They don't want to subscribe to that anymore, and I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, so. And I really think you can credit. There's some incredible administrative figures there that are really pushing us to think that way, which is really exciting, and incredible voice faculty, incredible composition faculty that want to collaborate with student performers. I mean, it's an exciting place. I feel very lucky to be there.
Well, I hope they hold on to you.
Thank you. Me too.
So as fellow female music educators, choral professionals. I'm wondering if you can give us some advice on how to reshape the classical music canon so that we are effectively highlighting female composers, historic or contemporary, in our ensembles, which Catherine and I both work with the children in the chorus of Westerly and the adults. So in either they all come together.
Right.
Our chorus is intergenerational, but in both senses, how can we, highlight those female composers?
Yeah, I think just to take a step back from that, our job is to preserve and to innovate, I think. And I think the way that we preserve is by remaining relevant. The more relevant our art form is, the more respect and interest there is in the history of our art form. Right. And so I really think that it's our responsibility to be regular participants in the creation of art and the commissioning of new art. New music, and I know this is a part of what Westerly does too, new art, new music, we're a reflection of society and culture. That's our work. It's not, to preach and to say this is how we should all feel and think and believe, but rather to sort of reflect, right? And to be storytellers and to really think about how the work that we do, whether it be existing work or new work, is relevant to the people that are sitting in the room with us. There are a number of ensembles and artistic leaders that I admire greatly that have put this at the forefront of their work. And I think that, there is plenty to be done in terms of, elevating very specific communities of artists. So thinking about women and, people of color and indigenous people. And I think, we want to elevate everyone's work. And the way we do that is we make room for new voices, and we have to open our ears and our minds to new sounds. And so then, and I'm a little bit talking to audience too. And I know, I think as artistic directors, we kind of know what we want to do. As audiences, I think we have to get better at being uncomfortable. We have to get better, and this goes for me too. I mean, I have my own preferences. I know the music where my brain starts wandering because I'm not interested. Maybe, that's because it's unfamiliar and I don't understand it, or maybe that's because I think it's boring and it sounds like something that, I wouldn't want to perform myself. But we all have these biases, and we have to recognize them, recognize what of them is not good. It's okay to have preferences. In fact, that's what makes us interesting. But I think that, and unique. But I think that really allowing ourselves to experience art, music, whether it's visual, whether it's oral, that doesn't necessarily just adhere to the expectations and the preferences we already have. Because if it's only that, we walk away feeling affirmed, right? Feeling that everything that we already liked is good and continues to be good in the world, and we go on with our life. But to me, a great concert is one where I walk away thinking and asking questions. And I think that happens at least as often when the artistic leader or the composer or the performers on the stage are women or people of color. And it probably happens even more because those are voices that we have not heard from as often. And if we are open to inviting new creators into our ears and our rooms and onto our stages, we're going to have a more expansive and more inclusive idea of what ideal art is, right? And we've sort of, myself included, someone with 3 degrees from American institutions, that really taught me to prefer and be trained in a certain type of singing, a certain type of vocal technique, a certain set of composers that I'm supposed to know everything they wrote and be able to regurgitate it on a page. There's a lot of music that I was never taught that is at least that good, right? And so then our responsibility as artistic directors is to just dig. We have to dig so deep and ask questions and watch what other people are doing. Look more closely at what the ensembles around us are doing. And I think in the vocal world, we have to look more closely at what instrumental ensembles are doing. Because there are composers out there writing for instrumental ensembles that have instincts that would really suit the voice right? That have compositional styles that are, quite forward thinking in terms of timbre and texture. Why not have them writing for choir, right? Why not have vocal ensembles be the new string quartet, where you try all of your extended techniques and change people's ideas about what's possible, And so I guess that's a very large answer, but I just feel like, that our work is never done in finding new music. It's so easy to do the music we already know or that people have told us we should do. And you'll never reach the bottom of that pile. I will never have done every piece that I studied in grad school and said, oh, someday I'm going to perform that. I will never perform all that music, even if that's all that I do. So I should maybe do a little less of that, since I'm not going to do all of it anyway, and do more of something that nobody's heard before. Right?
That makes so much sense. And, the part where you talked about staying relevant is, just my background and my expertise is in music ed, and I taught in public schools for 5 years. And, our whole point of becoming music educators is not because we really wanted to be an educator and we picked music. It's usually that we are musicians and we love it and we want to, enlight that passion into our students and the children that we teach or the adults that we teach. And, depending on where you are and where you're teaching, sometimes you are put into a place where the culture isn't to value music as part of just what makes the world go round and part of our cultural identity. And so it's really, in order for me to have related to my students, I had to be relevant and relate to them in a way that they can understand why I feel so passionate about the music too. So thank you for saying that. That was really great.
I want to say something too, that as a teacher, what's relevant to my students is not always the same as what's relevant to me.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Right? And so that's another job that I have, is because it can't just be relevant to the audience. It has to be relevant to the people telling the story. They have to feel like what they're saying is meaningful. So, that's why teaching your work is never done, because you're always learning from the people you're teaching.
That's the truth. Yeah. Do you have any advice for young people looking at a career in music?
Yes. Well, my first warning is that it's hard and you won't make very much money, right?
That's what I always say.
But I will not be the person to say, and therefore don't pursue it.
Right.
My parents we're public school educators. That doesn't pay very well either. But if you know that's what you want to do, and you feel a passion and that fire in your belly, that's how you want to spend your days, then you have to follow that. You don't have to. But I think, you're bound to be happier if you do. And the piece of advice I would have, and this is really simple, but I'm not sure anyone ever said this to me. Don't wait for someone to give you permission to do something. I think there were times in my training where I was kind of coming up through, whatever basically assigned path of how I would become a music educator, how I would become a conductor. It's very clear what you're supposed to do. And there were moments where in my head, I was like, I want to do this thing, or I want to be a part of this thing. I'm going to wait to be invited, or I'm going to wait to be told, now you're ready, Right. And the truth is, the things that I did without waiting for that permission or that sort of invitation from the powers that be, that I deemed, the people who could tell me when I was ready. But it was the decisions I made by myself, where I said, this has to be done and no one else is doing it. So I think I'm going to go do it myself, and I'm kind of not going to wait for anyone else to tell me it's time. Those are the things that have made my career feel worthwhile and point towards something more than an accomplishment, right? I was just reading something today, actually a blog from a yoga teacher of mine, about the difference between accomplishment and legacy. And, legacy is about what goes well beyond your life. And there are so many milestones in a career as a musician, ways that we define our success, and a lot of those have to do with accomplishment. They have to do with competitions and awards and degrees and checking repertoire off the box, or X number of roles, or which ensembles I've worked with. But none of that matters if the work that you're doing is only about your reputation. It only matters if it's making a difference for the generations that are going to follow you. And I don't think everything I've done has, I've done things for the accomplishment also, but it's the things where I can look back, and Lorelei is one of those things where I know that this work, yes, it's an accomplishment, but really what it's doing is it's paving the way, and honestly following along on a way that was paved for us by previous women in this field, that people are going to continue to walk on, and it's going to become, a more common path and a wider, evenly tread path by more young women, because we were willing to do it. That's work that continues beyond my career and probably beyond my lifetime, right? Not probably, certainly. That's so important. And I think that's, as artists, if you feel like you're doing that even in one narrow path of your work, maybe not all of it, because we all still just have to make money. We have to have enough gigs, and sometimes you take a gig that you're not as excited about. But just make sure there's one pathway that you're walking down where you feel like you're widening it for other people. Because if you have the ability to do that, then it's your responsibility to make it possible for somebody else that's going to follow you. That's what, if you want to talk about also privilege, which we're all thinking about, if you are studying music at an amazing institution, or you're aiming to study music at an amazing institution, once you've got your feet on the ground, now your job is not just your own accomplishment. It's about making space for others.
Mm-hmm. That was great. Thank
you.
So
well said. Oh my goodness. So speaking about gigs, we should talk about some events that are coming up, because we would love our members to know about this. Ben, if you have that website that you can, I don't know if you can hear me right now, but we'll make sure that gets displayed. So talk about, you've got 2 projects that are web experiences that our audience members could join.
Yeah, so actually, I think you're watching this on Wednesday night, and so right after this, we're launching a world premiere of a new video of one movement of a new piece by Christopher Cerrone. The piece is called Beaufort Scales, which is a 19th century wind scale, kind of poetic prose about sort of the extremes of weather. And so we've done one movement of that in a multi-track setting that we're releasing with video tonight. And the visual design is by Hannah Wasilewski. She's an amazing projection artist. But in this case, not projection, just on your home screen. And when we ultimately perform this, it'll be about a 35-minute work with floor-to-ceiling projection behind us, live electronics, and amplification. So this is just a premiere of that live project that's on tap for probably 2022. And then we also just went through a whole lot of testing and quarantining. So 6 of us could get together in Boston a couple of weeks ago, and we recorded a holiday concert that's about 50 minutes of music that will be available pay-per-view for most of the month of December. And that's everything from very early monody all the way through music of David Lang, and a lot of early American music to pay homage to our Boston roots, some Shape Note and other American tunes. So that should be really fabulous. And of course, we'll be doing more in the spring too, but that's what's immediately ahead.
Oh, that just sounds fabulous. So everybody check that out. That is actually on the Lorelei website. You can click to register for either concert. And not to be missed, you can even see from that link our own Emily Marwash we claim here at the Chorus of Westerly. She's such a popular soloist here. So we're all really looking forward to that. Genevieve, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I don't think so. This has been so wonderful, and just the conversation, it feels like, when COVID is just so interesting for us as music educators, as singers, as musicians. We're really missing that like live human connection and like the feeling of singing together and moving our bodies in the same way and creating the sound that just rattles around us. And I feel as though having this conversation with you has really like filled in some of those holes that this quarantine has kind of given us as musicians, because we've been able to talk about some wonderful things, especially in music, adding choral in the world. And I just thank you so much. This has been wonderful, and I'm really excited for what Lorelei has to come and coming up, and I can't wait to see all of the wonderful things you're doing. And I'm so happy that our groups are so close. We feel connected to Lorelei because we know so many of you so well. And so this has just been wonderful. And I thank you so much for.
Thank you. What a pleasure to chat with you. I mean, I agree. COVID has made space for some conversations that we might not otherwise have. And I want to just say thanks to Westerly and all of our friends there. And, we hope that we get to be together in a room one of these days soon.
Can't wait.
The feeling's mutual, my goodness. Thanks again for joining us. And just one more shout out to our sponsors. That's the Rhode Island Council on the Arts and the Blue Mitten Thrift Shop. And thanks again to Beth Willer for giving us so many inspiring things to think about. And we know that you are one of the charging leaders of women in music in this country. And thank you for sharing so much time with us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right. Take care, everyone.